تهت وتحيريت بمري إلي غيرك منو ليهدي. أنا الخجلان من ذنبي، عذر مقبول ما عندي. إذا صوت الأجل نادى وترس دمع الندم خدي
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام را، تلك آيات الكتاب المبين. إنا أنزلناه قرآنا عربيا لعلكم تعقلون. نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين. نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين. إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبت إني رأيت 11 يا أبت إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر يا أبت إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين. قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على قوتك فيكيد لك كيدا. إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجمين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. صدق الله العلي العظيم. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman across the globe, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: how powerful is knowledge? When we come to the concept of a worldview and how we see the world, we are on this discussion and on this journey, or rather this quest to find meaning in our life. That is, how do I develop meaning in my life, and why is this meaning important in my life from a secular standpoint as well as from a religious standpoint? And one of the fundamental bases of this conversation is that understanding what I believe and also what is my meaning in life, and understanding these fundamental issues can help us in actually seeing where we actually end up in life. And you may ask, well, how that is? And you may ask why that is. Because the underlying thoughts that we have, the underlying beliefs that we harbor in our heart and our mind, these underlying thoughts and beliefs actually end up leading to our actions in our lives. And once we implement those thoughts and those ideas in action, over time, they become our character. And as it becomes over time, that character becomes our destiny in our life. Therefore, the thoughts and ideas that you have in your mind, those lead to your words. That is what you say and what you speak out. Those are the underlying culmination of what you hold dear in your heart and in your mind. The next level after the words is the action that follows suit from the words that one may say. And after that action, over time, this becomes your character. And after the character, over time, this becomes your habits and your destiny and ultimately who you are in life. That's why one may argue that Islam puts such a heavy emphasis on the belief system, which we've been discussing in the subsequent nights. That is the usuluddin, that is the roots of religion, the foundations of religion, if you will. Because that belief system, the underlying belief system, actually translates into how we behave in the world and how we exist in the world. But the question I want to ask in front of you tonight, ask myself and the audience at large, is, where do your beliefs come from? As in, are your beliefs your own? And if they are not, who do those beliefs belong to? And how was your worldview sculpted? How was your worldview created? According to philosophers throughout time, if you know two details, you can at some point right away tell the belief of someone. That is, if you know the time and the space in which that person exists, you can tell all of their belief system. You don't need to know anything necessarily about them as an individual person. Therefore, in our analysis tonight, I want to look at how our viewpoints have been fostered, how have they been cultivated, how have they been sculpted, with our knowing or without our knowing as well. Therefore, number one, we will look at how has this thought process, this worldview, this narrative, this way I see the world, how has it been sculpted? And by whom has it been sculpted? Number 2, what is the relationship of Islam and knowledge? Number 3, what is the viewpoint of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam in particular and their relationship with knowledge? Number 4, what is the relationship of Islam and Muslim civilizations and knowledge, and how does that relate to our life in the modern era and the modern world? And number 5, how does this connect and how does this relate to the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, which is connected to the mission of every one of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and is not disconnected? Looking at these 5 elements, we will be able to understand how worldview is sculpted and created, and how it may very well be the case that my worldview may have been inherited or actually pushed by an agenda, whether I realize it or not. And ultimately, once I realize this, I can get on and set out on a journey to find my purpose, to find my meaning, why I'm here, and what my contribution is in the world. This is our schedule and our agenda for the night in the brief moments that we have together, inshallah. From the bottom of your heart, wherever you may be across the globe, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad from the bottom of your heart. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. The first element and the first level of analysis that we'll want to look at here is, where did your belief system come from, and how was it cultivated and how was it fostered? There are many ways and many levels to analyze this conversation on. One can look at it from a political standpoint, from a geographic standpoint, from an economic standpoint. We will not look at it necessarily from any of these directly. I want to focus on the level of education and how that may have been cultivated and fostered. If you look at a country such as the United States of America, you will find that in the United States of America, which is statistically the most religious developed economy in the world, I'm using my words carefully here, the most religious developed economy in the Western Hemisphere, I should say, you will find that it is much more religious, relatively speaking, to a place such as Europe, on average. And you will find many churches and mega churches throughout the United States, and you will find people who regularly attend church and are actively religious individuals in their life. At the same time, you will find a variance in how religion is practiced throughout the United States of America. Meaning, if you go to the northeast of the United States, or the southwest of the United States, or the southeast of the United States, or for example, if you go to the west coast of the United States, or the midwest of the United States, in all of these different localities, you will find a different version of religion. For example, if you read the history of the United States, and you look at the modern United States, you will find a region which stretches roughly from Virginia all the way through to Texas. This region of the south of the United States is known historically as the Bible Belt. This Bible Belt is where historically there has been tremendous religiosity and adherence to religion. At the same time, if you contrast that with the Northeast, or for example the Midwest arguably after the South, which is the Bible Belt, you will find the Midwest more religious than other places such as the coasts of the United States of America. And amongst the coasts, the East Coast and the West Coast, you will find that the West Coast of the United States is much more liberal and is much less conservative compared to the rest of the United States, at least according to sociologists and experts on culture and society and civilization. Why is it? Why is it that the Bible Belt, that is the southern region from Virginia to Texas, is relatively more religious? Why is it that, for example, the west of the United States, that is California, is relatively more liberal in nature? And at the same time, why is a place such as Europe, for example, so secular, relative at least to the United States of America, and not so religious? Is it because the people are necessarily different? Or were there historical events that led to that dynamic? I say this because you, watching this, my dear viewer, may think that your view and your thought process is entirely your own, whereas you may realize on deeper analysis, it is simply where you are born and raised in the environment and the time and space in which you exist that has actually handed over to you what you actually believe. And it's not something necessarily that you have originally come up with from the bottom of your heart or through your intellect or anything of that nature. If you look at the history of the South of America, you found very religious dynamics occurring there. And at the same time, if you look at the West of the United States, you found an era in time, for example, in 1849, the gold rush, which led many people to leave the eastern United States and head westward in search of gold. at that time, for example, there was a gold rush ensuing and people were finding gold. So in this hope and aspiration of gaining riches, many people moved westward. And many of these people who moved westward were not necessarily those people who were traditional. There were many people who were more pioneering. There are people who are, for example, willing to take risks and go above and beyond. And necessarily, they may not have been so conservative. They may have been more willing to take risk. Nonetheless, as time progressed, you noticed a culture emerging in the West of, for example, pioneering, of cowboys and many of these other types of cultural dynamics that were at play. And therefore, the West became a place that was not as religious as the east of the United States, and especially not as the south or the Midwest of the United States of America. I say this because afterwards, after Europe, one of the most atheistic regions of the world, one may argue, is, for example, the region of California in the United States of America on the West Coast. These are dynamics which sociologists have looked at in order to understand what's going on here. Now, you may say, I grew up in a part of the world such as the Middle East. I grew up in a part of the world such as, for example, India or Pakistan, or for example, Iraq, or for example, Lebanon, or for example, any similar place. And I'm immune to this, for example. I want to share some research and some insight with you. And you need to understand some of this in order to understand how your worldview was cultivated and how it may have been done much before you even realize it. And this is not necessarily my research, by the way. This is what experts have listed and looked at in terms of how our worldviews were developed. Our worldviews were developed. In the 1500s, there was a movement in Europe which emerged, which was called the Renaissance. The 1500s and 1600s of Europe led to a movement called the Renaissance. It was a time after which Europe had moved away from the Dark Ages. And when Europe had moved away, was beginning to move away from the Dark Ages, we saw a new environment taking hold and a new environment taking place. Islam and Muslim civilization had flourished during this period or prior to this period of time. Gutenberg invents his printing press, which changes the entire dynamics of civilization. Europe, which was in the Dark Ages, this printing press, which emerged by Gutenberg at the end of the 14th century, or the 1400s, beginning of the 1500s, it led to an environment where that was the internet of its time. And because it was the internet of its time, it changed the entire paradigm of civilization. Please pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because it will perhaps shake the foundation of what you knew to be reality. When Gutenberg invented his printing press, knowledge began to spread like wildfire throughout Europe. At the same time, the Muslim civilizations, because they had been so advanced prior to this era and time, they didn't necessarily think any threat or any concern of the Western European civilizations. Therefore, in this period of 1500 to 1800, this 300-year period, knowledge began to spread like wildfire in Europe. The Renaissance gave rise to the Enlightenment era. In 1800, there was a moment in time where Napoleon comes to Egypt. Napoleon invades Cairo. This is a monumental moment in history. And this history is where Europe comes face to face with Islamic civilizations and Islamic cultures. There was a movement in the 1800s and in the 1900s, according to experts in this field of politics, geography, and world history, where they argue that there was a colonization movement, which is well known. And the main countries which were at the forefront of this dynamic were England and France. I say this because in order to understand this, you must know where your worldview came from. When they took over this region, they began to spread the maps and they began to take over the region. And they began to divide it however they deemed fit. Many of these did not even make sense. For example, if you look at the region of Balochistan, a particular region, for example, Sistan or Balochistan, that region where in Iran, for example, in modern day Iran, where Ayatollah Sistani's ancestors may have hailed from, for example, is split between Iran and Pakistan. This is simply due to the efforts of colonizing powers and not necessarily due to any logical reasons. You will find many examples of this throughout history. I don't want to get into the geopolitics. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested, however, in is in the educational dynamics that took place. There were missionary movements that took place in the 1800s and the 1900s that focused on educating Muslim civilizations and Muslim communities in the Middle East as well as in Asia, including what is modern-day Pakistan, as well as modern-day India, as well as the Middle East, such as Lebanon and Iraq, and many other countries throughout that region, into North Africa, as well as the Middle East, as well as Asia. And in this movement, these individuals or these movements had a particular goal of trying to convert the underlying communities from Islam to Christianity. Now, according to experts, they did not succeed in converting people from Islam towards Christianity. In that, they were not successful. However, and this is where I beg your attention, they were very successful in changing the underlying world view of how you saw the world. Please pay close attention. Because in the Islamic educational system, there was an underlying Quranic studies institutions. This would be like elementary school, where you were taught Quran, basic Arabic, basic literature, and basic mathematics. The next level were the madrasas, where they would have Islamic education as well as secular educations into universities and secondary institutions of learning. Islam was taught as part and parcel of the secular academics as well, which we'll come to in a moment. But when these institutions emerged, they emerged as the main institutions of learning in the north of Africa, in Middle East, in Asia, in modern day Pakistan, and also India. And what ended up happening was the intelligentsia, that is, the most intellectual, the aristocrats, the wealthy of society, they began to send their children to these convents, to these monasteries, to these institutions of higher learning. And at the same time, whether they realized it or not, it actually took from them their Islamic identity. Therefore, if you are advanced, therefore, if you are intellectual, therefore, if you are someone who was the most rational and learned of society, you didn't go to an Islamic institution, you went to a school of education that was based on Christian learning principles. An example of this, which is not my example, by the way, it's according to people who are historians, philosophers, and experts of Islamic civilizations, was the American University in Beirut. This was an institution which was actually initially named, if you read its history, the Syrian Protestant College. It was founded with a very, very clear Protestant heritage and Protestant roots. And it has become known as one of the premier institutions of learning in the Arab world. In fact, when they were trying to establish a chair of Islamic studies in this institution, if you read this institution's history, there was immense pushback because it had such a secular and Christian tilt to it. Therefore, whether you realize it or not, whether you understand it or not, your worldview, not in the last 1 decade, not in the last 2 decades, but at least for the last 150 to 200 years, has already begun to be cultivated and sculpted by interests that may not be necessarily your own and your own communities and your own societies. Because those aristocrats, because that intelligentsia in Northern Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, when they began to send their children into these institutions that were Catholic or Protestant monasteries or colleges and universities based on those principles, it robbed them in a sense of their Islamic identity. And therefore, they began to be cultivated and colonized, not only literally, but they began to become colonized intellectually. So the worldview had already begun to form. At the same time, it led to an emergence of an inferiority complex amongst many, and therefore an ultra-Westernization. This is the first element. The second element, and I'm talking about in a philosophical sense. The second element is the adoption of modern Western sciences, Western philosophical, not geographical, because this could be in the East as well, such as in a world such as Japan or similar. Understand this principle because you will realize much of your worldview is not necessarily your own. When Western science began to be taught as an end-all be-all for society throughout the East, what ended up happening was the underlying philosophy on which science was based became the norm, which was the philosophy of skepticism, which was the philosophy of doubt. Now, as I've mentioned in previous lectures, and I repeat here, there is no doubt about the benefits of modern medicine. There is no doubt about the benefits of the scientific method. It has led to so much progress in society. At the same time, for one to take on this scientific paradigm as the end-all, be-all, and people begin to say that this is a sort of worldview that is the scientism, that says science as the absolute answer to everything, there are gaps and holes in science as well. Such as what? Such as the gap in science, such as the hole in science with respect to science being that thing that tells you about ethics. Science does not tell us about ethics. Science does not tell us about good and bad. You need philosophy, you need morality, you need these ethical principles to tell you what's good or bad. Otherwise, science will say an atom can be used to understand the world, or an atom can be used to create an atomic bomb, or nuclear energy, or a nuclear bomb. It can be used to hurt society, harm society, or it can also be used to benefit society. It's upon you to understand the usage. You need a philosophical, an ethical, a principled understanding in order to understand where you are supposed to use science and where you are not to use science. In fact, a blind observance, a blind adherence to science is actually called scientism, where one begins to believe science without actually questioning the premise on which it's founded. I say this why? If you read study after study, I mentioned to you the night or two before about the merchants of doubt, where the tobacco lobby, where the climate industry, for example, where the energy industry were able to influence some of the top institutions in the world by funding them. And as a result of that, what emerged was a sort of distortion of reality. This happened in the case of the tobacco lobby in the United States. This happened in the case of the sugar lobby in the United States. The sugar lobby, which actually spent millions of dollars in order, and by the way, this was in the popular press throughout the United States and the world. It was not hidden news. That what happened was the sugar lobby was spending millions of dollars in the United States in order to divert attention away from the negative impact of sugar on the heart and focus more and more on the impact of fat and animal products on the heart. That means for over 5 decades, there was research that should have been being done, which was not being done. That is, how harmful the sugar may be for the body. And today, research is beginning to show that. All of these data points that I am putting on your radar, I am doing in order for you to connect the dots, to understand that the worldview that you have right now at this very moment, while you're observing this conversation that we're taking place with together, your worldview may not be your worldview. As the philosopher said, tell me the time and space in which you exist, and I will tell you your worldview. One of the principles of Islam, coming towards the next elements of our conversation, is that one must understand a knowledge and implement knowledge in their lives. There was a publication in Iraq called Al-Ilm. It was a regular journal publication, and the cover of this publication was very beautiful and very artistic. And at each level, in each corner of this calligraphy and this mural and this artistic work which made the cover of this journal and this publication, in each corner there was a tradition, a prophetic tradition, which highlighted the seeking of knowledge, the emphasis of knowledge, and the understanding of knowledge. What is our worldview? How do we see the world? The Quran, the Ahlul Bayt, why this emphasis? Why this emphasis on Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I'm getting to this same concept to understand the worldview and how we see the world. This publication had 4 corners, 4 prophetic traditions in each one. The first element being obtain knowledge even if you have to go to China. This is something that at that time was a very ardent journey. It was a very difficult journey. It was not an easy journey to go towards China. At that time, the emphasis meaning that it's not space-bound, meaning that it's not based on where I'm living, only if I stay there I get knowledge. No, if you have to travel, go and get knowledge. The emphasis on knowledge in Islam was at that level, not space-bound. The second level was obtain knowledge from the cradle until the grave. Now, the cradle to the grave, does that leave any time in one's life where one should not be obtaining knowledge, or one should not be observing knowledge? And the answer comes forward that every moment of your life, you should be obtaining knowledge. Every moment in your life, you should be striving for knowledge. We sometimes in our modern world, we think that I went to university for 4 years, or I went to university for 6 years, or I got my doctorate, or whatever I got. And at that time, learning ends. I don't need to open a book after that. In fact, I remember reading a publication that said the average student in the United States, after graduating high school, they never finish a book cover to cover in their life thereafter. Imagine for a moment that you are someone who, for example, you go and see your doctor. When you go and see your doctor recommends that you begin to exercise. You begin to watch your diet and you begin to exercise regularly for health benefits. And you say to your doctor, I worked out when I was in college. I worked out when I was in high school. I worked out a lot for 2, 3, 4 years consistently. I don't need to work out anymore. What would your physician respond? Say, well, yes, you worked out then and you certainly had benefits at that time perhaps, but now that's not now. You need to work out now in order to have health benefits in your life. The same principle as it is with learning. Learning will benefit you throughout your life. Therefore, the second prophetic tradition, which was in the corner of this magazine or this publication, was obtain knowledge even if you have to go to China. And obtain knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Two very important traditions which tell us that it is neither time-bound nor space-bound. That is, in Islam, you should be obtaining knowledge from the cradle to the grave, and even if you have to go to China. It's not time-bound, not space-bound. At every moment and in every environment, one should be obtaining knowledge. The next one, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ in some traditions. That obtaining knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim and every Muslimah, every male and every female. The tradition says Muslim, which is encompassing of male and female, but in some traditions you will find also it's been explicitly stated, male and female. Nonetheless, that means it is not bound by space, it is not bound by time, it is not bound by gender, every time, every space must be absorbing and must be learning knowledge at every moment in time. What other focus do you need? What other emphasis do you need? Time, space, at every moment. The fourth element that you will find, that one should obtain knowledge from whoever it may be, even if it is non-Muslim. That one should obtain knowledge from whatever source that you can glean it from. Because knowledge is the lost property of a believer. Meaning, neither is it based on space, neither is it limited by time, neither is it limited by gender, and neither is it limited by the teacher. That is, if it is someone who is a Jew, someone who is a Christian, someone who is an atheist, does not matter. Whoever the teacher is, if it's truth, if it's rational, if it's logical, and if it meets the criteria of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, therefore I should accept it. This mural, it's stated, this artwork was framed on the back of the editor of the journal's office. Behind his desk, it was framed. A German Orientalist, we are told, visited. When this Orientalist visited, he looked at this mural or this artwork that was on the back of the office. When he looked at the back of the office and he saw this behind the desk, that is, on the wall, he began to say, what is this artwork? It looks very peculiar. It looks very interesting. Can you explain it to me? He says, well, it's prophetic traditions. And he explained them one after the other. Obtain knowledge, even if you have to go to China. Obtain knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Obtaining knowledge is an obligation amongst every male and female, amongst every Muslim. And obtain knowledge, no matter who the teacher is, for it is the lost property of the believer. And in the middle was the verse of the Quran, the first of Revelation, Iqra, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Iqra. That is, read in the name of your Lord. That is, read. He says, what is each one? He explained the four traditions and he said the first verse of Revelation, that is, read in the name of your Lord. The German Orientalist began to be shocked. He said, wow, I never knew this, and I'm baffled, and I'm shocked that Muslims are not at the forefront of knowledge and intellect and academia in the world. However, he may not have read the history of Islam. But at the same time, this gives us a moment to pause and reflect about what is our own worldview. And are we adhering to true Islam? What are the principles of Islam? The principles of Islam can be summarized in Tawheed. Our compass in life is the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. This compass guides us when we are lost. And it directs us at every moment. lost or not. And the guiding principles that the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt point towards, the same way that the compass points towards north, the guiding compass of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt guide us towards Tawheed. The manhaj, the vision, the school of thought of Rasul al-A'zam, of Amir al-Mu'mineen, of Hassan al-Mujtaba, of Hussein, all the way to the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asri wal-Zaman, can be summed up in Tawheed. They never asked us to believe in them. They never asked for us to accept them. They never asked for us to follow them for their own sake. No, they asked for us to follow the word of God, to ultimately get us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the question you and I ask is, what is the worldview of our modern world? And it gives us pause to reflect in our modern world about how we see that world, especially in an uncertain time such as that of COVID-19, the uncertainty that has been in our world. You see, it may be a moment for us to pause and reflect on where we are in life and where we're going. You see, in much of our modern world, the focus is to live a happy life in the forgetfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you are forgetting Allah, when you are in a state of ghafla, when you are in a state of negligence, and when you are in a state of heedlessness of who? Of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you are trying to still get happiness, you will never have peace and satisfaction in life. Because the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid itself tells us, Ala bi zikrillahi tatma'inna al-qulub, that verily in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do the hearts find solace. That is where meaning lies. That is where purpose lies. In living a God-centric life. In living a life the way Rasulullah lived. In living a life where Amir al-Mu'mineen lived. And living a life such as Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. Yes, their standard, their caliber is much higher. But they reminded us, never live a moment of your life in a way, in a state where you are heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And understanding knowledge and ilm through the Ahlul Bayt, through the Quran, through the Ahlul Bayt, and through the scholars, the righteous scholars of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. These three dimensions will allow us to have a preservation of the faith and preservation of the faithful, and understand knowledge under that framework so that we can live a harmonious life. In the next lectures, we'll be discussing how it is that the scholars of Ahlul Bayt and the Ahlul Bayt themselves implemented knowledge to help us understand what is our worldview and how we can implement it in our lives and in our next generations so we can give rise to a strong future generations. We turn our hearts and our minds to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's movement. And on this night, we remember and we commemorate the great personality, the ambassador of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Muslim ibn Aqil. We are told this individual who was sent to Kufa by Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when the Kufans had written letters to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam inviting him, we are told Muslim is in the city of Kufa. He has come to Kufa, and in that environment we are told that in the beginning there is some support, but eventually there is a rule, there is an order which overturns the dynamics against Muslim ibn Aqil. We are told he has become exiled. We are told that no one is willing to keep him in the city. We are told that he is going from place to place, searching for some solace, searching for some peace, and he ends up on some stairs in the middle of the alleyways of Kufa. We are told he is parched, he is in thirst. When he ends up on these stairs, an elderly lady opens the door. She says, oh man, who are you? What are you doing here? At that point in time, we are told, Muslim says, I am a stranger. Where is one supposed to go when they have no place to go? He asks for some water from this lady. She gives him the water. At that point in time, she is telling him and she is pleading with him to go. He says, I have nowhere to go. She says, who are you? He says, I am Muslim from the family of Ali ibn Abi Talib. When she heard this, she said, okay, very well, I give you the permission. Because you have nowhere to go, I will give you some place. I will give you some amnesty. She makes some preparations. She puts a room for him so that he can get some rest. We are told, and she witnesses, that the whole night Muslim prays. He is not sleeping, he is praying to his Lord. When this lady's son emerges in the home, he realizes that there is someone in the home. He realizes that it is Muslim, the one who has been outlawed in Kufa. He goes and he gives the message to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Ubaydullah dispatches thousands of men, we are told, to the house because he knows this is the family of Ali ibn Abi Talib. These are the greatest warriors. When this army is dispatched, they begin to fight with Muslim. Muslim fights them courageously, and when he fights them courageously, but eventually there are an army of people, they ambush Muslim, they surround him from all the corners. When they surround him, they overpower him, they take him towards Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Ubaydullah orders for the murder, for the assassination, for the martyrdom of Muslim. He orders for him to be thrown away and to be thrown off from the roof. When he orders for him to be thrown away and thrown off of the roof, he asks for the ability to pray to Allah. When he asks for the ability to pray to Allah, it is granted. He prays to Allah. And he faces towards his Imam who is in journey, and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. They take Muslim, they throw him from the Darul Amara, they throw him from the height. He is martyred. Imam al-Hussein, some days later, he receives the news of the passing of Muslim. When he receives the news, he says, Zainab, Zainab, my sister, go and call and go and bring Hamida, Hamida, the daughter of Muslim. When Zainab, salamullahi alayha, Sayyida Zainab brings Hamida. When Sayyida Zainab brings Hamida, Imam al-Hussein takes his niece and puts her in his lap. He puts his hand on her head. He shows so much affection. Hamida was an intelligent child from the family of the Ahlul Bayt. She said, my uncle Aba Abdullah, why do you treat me the same way that the orphans are treated? Can you tell me what has happened? She begins to cry. Imam al-Hussein says, oh daughter, I am your uncle. I give you the condolences of your father. Some traditions say Imam put some earrings on her ears. Oh Hamida, may Allah reward you for the loss of your father. But come to Karbala, come to Ashura, the daughter of Imam al-Hussein, we are told, Ruqayyah. No one was there to give her condolences. We are told that the enemies of Allah, they ripped the earrings from her ear. The blood began to flow from her ears.
years. Hamida, may there be 1,000 salams on you, but never forget the daughters of Imam Hussein.
أجركم الله. Muslim ibn Aqil, after finishing Salat al-Jama'ah, he would walk in the streets of Kufa with those who said that they were to support him, أجركم الله. But it was not long until he would turn around and he would say that none of his supporters are with him. He would carry on walking, and he becomes thirsty, he becomes tired, he knocks on a door. When he knocks on that door, a lady would come out by the name of Tawa. He would say to her, "Can I have some water to drink?" She would bring him a cup of water. After finishing that cup, he would stay by the door. She said to him, "It is not appropriate for you to stay by my door. I am a woman who lives alone." He said to her, "And I am a stranger." She said to him, "Where do you come from?" He said to him, "I come from Medina." She said to him, "What is your name?" He said to her, "My name is Muslim ibn Aqil." When she found out that he was related to Amir al-Mu'mineen, she would tell him that, "Come into my house, Ajarakumullah." She would give him some food, something to drink. He would rest, he would start to pray, then he would fall asleep and he would see his uncle Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would see Rasulullah, he would see his father Aqil, he would see his uncle Ja'far, all of them saying, "Hasten, hasten towards us, O Muslim." Ajarakumullah, he knew that this was his last night, yes, so he spent it in prayer and in worship until he would hear the hoofs of the horses approaching. He would get up, wear his armor, get ready to fight. As he is leaving, Tawa would stop him. She said to him, "Muslim, where are you going? Hide. Don't go out to these people. They will kill you." He said to her, "Oh Tawa, do not worry. Do not worry. I have to go out right now. I cannot stay in here." And then he would tell her, "Oh Tawa, it is not for you to worry. You have done everything that you could do, and you have attained the shafa'ah of my uncle Amir al-Mu'mineen." قال لها يا طاعة اليوم ما تحصل سلامة، هوصيك بهالبلد لو دخلوا يتام، قل لهم مسلم ترى يبلغكم سلامة، واجرج على الله والنبي سيد الوصيين. He has one final wish, one final will. He says to her, "Oh Tawa, if they were to enter orphans into the city, then tell them that Muslim sends his salams." Ajarakumullah, he would go out and he would fight like a brave warrior, reminding them of his uncle Amir al-Mu'mineen, until he would kill many men from them. Then the leader of the police of Kufa would send to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, may Allah withdraw his mercy from them. He would say to him, "I need more soldiers." Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad would tell him, "I sent you to one man and you want more soldiers? What will you do when I send you to another man?" Referring to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He would reply to him, "Do you think that you sent me to a random person from the people of Kufa? He sent me to one of the bravest of the Hashemites. This is Muslim ibn Aqil." Ajarakumullah, he would send him more troops, he would send him soldiers, he would send him more armatured. They would fight Muslim ibn Aqil. One man would hit Muslim on his lip, Ajarakumullah, and another few men would start to dig a hole behind Muslim. The people of Kufa started to gather as well. They started to go from the top of the houses and they would throw rocks at Muslim, Ajarakumullah, and slowly the soldiers would push Muslim towards the ditch until Muslim would fall in the ditch, Ajarakumullah. One of the enemies would raise his sword sword, and he would hit Muslim on the head. Aywa Muslimah wa Sayyidah. They would take Muslim Ajarakumullah, tie his hands, and they would take him to the castle of Ibn Ziyad. When he was entering the castle, he was asking them for some water. They brought him a bowl of water, a cup of water. He wanted to drink from it, and then blood would start to spill inside it. He would return it. They brought him a second one, and then more blood would fall inside it. They would bring him a third one, and from that wound that he had on his lip would fall into the water. Ajarakumullah. It's as if we would turn around to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, as if he would say to him, "Oh my cousin Hussein, if you were to die thirsty, then I will die in the same way." He would enter the castle of Ibn Ziyad. One of the enemies would tell him, "Oh Muslim, do you not send your salams to the prince?" He said to him, "He is a prince to you, but not to me." Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad would look at him. He would say to him, "If you send your salams or not, you will be dead. I will still kill you." He said to him, "Someone worse than you has killed someone better than me." He said to him, "In that case, then I will kill you a kill that has never happened in the history of Islam." Muslim would look at him and he would say to him, "Who are you, O Ibn Ziyad, and for you to talk about Islam?" Ibn Ziyad would get angry, he would get furious, he would call his guard, and he would tell him that take Muslim to the top of the castle. Ajarakumullah. Yes, O believers, they took Muslim to the top of the castle. Muslim would look at the soldier and he would tell him, "Allow me to pray 2 rak'at." Muslim would pray his final 2 rak'at. Then he would turn around to Medina. It's as if he wants to say, where is the person that can get to Imam al-Hussein right now to tell him that, "Oh Hussein, they have taken Muslim, they are about to kill him." وين اليوصل بهالحين الأرض المدينة ويخبر حسين مسلم وحيد وما له معين. هي والله ودارت عليه القوم يوم صوب. When he would turn around to Medina, he would shout with the loudest of his voices, "Assalamu alayk ya Aba Abdullah." The enemy would raise his sword, then he would hit Muslim on the neck. Aywa Muslimah wa Sayyidah wa Husayna. And it was not long after, and they would see the body of Muslim as it is being thrown from the top of the castle. What would they do then? You would think that they are done now, yes? No, they were not done. They would tie the feet of Muslim as well as the feet of Hani ibn Urwa, and they would start dragging them in the market of Kufa. عادة اليستجير يكون ينجار عن شتل حليف الشرف ينجار صدق مسلم بالحبل ينجار وتتنامس بشتل علوجال مي. هاجركم الله. That an Imam al-Hussein is in the city of Zarud. He would see 2 people from Kufa approach. He would tell them, "How did you leave Kufa?" They would say to him, "Oh Aba Abdullah, do you want us to summarize or do you want us to give you details?" He said to them, "No, summarize now and give me the details later." They would say to him, "Oh Aba Abdullah, we did not leave Kufa except with the feet of Hani and Muslim, tied as they were being dragged in the markets of Kufa." Imam al-Hussein would then say 3 times, "Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un." He would go to the tents, Ajarakumullah, he would call out Lady Zainab. This scene is very hurtful. He would call out Lady Zainab. He says to her, "Oh Zainab, bring me Hamida, the daughter of Muslim." Do you know how old she was? She was 4 years of age. Ajarakumullah. He said to her, "Bring me Hamida, the daughter of Muslim." He would bring Hamida. He would sit her on his lap. He would start to wipe over her head. She's 4 years, yes? She would look at him and she would tell him, "Oh, Uncle Hussein, why are you treating me like an orphan? Where is my father?" He said to her, "Oh, Hamida, I am your father." She said to him, "Oh, Uncle Hussein," knowing that her father was gone, yes? "Oh, Uncle Hussein, you are the best of fathers and you are the best of uncles. But how beautiful is it when my father would walk in and I say, 'Salam, Father Muslim.'" ثار الأبو يا ناس خيم والله يفي على بناته هي وحريمه إنا لله.
صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين.
وباجر يلعنك كل زايد يا يزيد وباجر يلعنك كل زايد. تموت انت والاخوتي تعلى القباب راح اقرا يا علي منين اخاف راح اقرا يا علي لا ابد ما خايفه لا ابد ما خايفه لا ابد. يلا عمي هذا زينب هذا زينب واقفه لا ابد ما خايفه هذا زينب هذا زينب واقفه لا ابد ما خايفه من اخاف وانا بالطالع رقص البارد شباب ها الحبيب ابو يحيى المسعراوي واقف وابدي وانا كان وما ادنق راسي شلون ادنق وهبه واقف على الرموح عباس واقف ابدي وانا كان وما ادنق راسي شلون ادنق وهبه واقف على الرموح شوف امامه يتكفيني اتنفس بانفاسي اتنفس بانفاسي لو صحيتين اندار راسه وينبض ويا احساسي وينبض ويا احساسي قل لي زينب قولي اوقف انا بطولي قل لي زينب قولي اوقف انا بطولي كافلي ألقى جواب